Okay, let's dive into one of the most profound and honestly one of the longest running debates in the history of Western philosophy. We're talking about the medieval mystery of universals. It's this massive puzzle about how we even understand the world, and it all kicked off with a simple refusal.
So, funnily enough, this whole thing started because a guy decided not to talk about it. Back in the 3rd century, this philosopher Porphyry is writing an introduction to Aristotle's logic. He gets to these basic concepts of genera and species, broad categories like animal, and more specific ones like human, and he just hits a brick wall. He lays out these 3 questions that are so deep, so fundamental, that he basically just throws up his hands and says, look, this is a most profound business, and I'm not touching it. And just like that, he lit a philosophical fuse that would burn for 1,000 years.
So here's our game plan. We're going to follow that fuse. We'll start with the question itself, then see how the philosopher Boethius finally decided to take on the challenge. Then we'll get into the main event, the huge showdown between the realists and the nominalists. And finally, we'll unpack why this seemingly abstract puzzle was such a massive deal for the medieval world.
Right, so what exactly was this piece of intellectual dynamite that Porphyry just left sitting there? What is the problem of universals?
Okay, the whole debate is about these general ideas that you and I use constantly without even thinking about it. When I say the word human, you don't just picture one specific person, right? You get this general concept that applies to billions of different people. That concept, humanity, that's a universal. And the big question is, what is that thing, really? Where is it? Is it real?
Porphyry was brilliant because he broke the problem down into 3 layered questions. First up, the reality check. Are these universals real things out there in the world, or are they just ideas we cook up in our heads? Second, the physical check. Okay, if they are real, are they physical things you can touch, like a rock, or are they non-physical, like a soul? And third, the location check. If they're not physical, do they exist on their own somewhere, floating around in some ideal realm, or do they only exist inside the physical things they describe?
For 2 whole centuries, that challenge just lay there, unanswered. Then finally, a thinker came along who was brave enough to pick it up.
And that person was Boethius, a Roman senator and philosopher who was living right at the very end of the Western Roman Empire. This guy is a huge deal because he's basically the bridge between the ancient world and the Middle Ages. He took on the massive task of translating the great works of Greek philosophy into Latin, saving them for centuries of European thinkers to come. And this is so important. His work, which everyone started calling the Old Logic, became the textbook for European universities for the next 600 years. That's not an exaggeration. When medieval scholars argued about logic and philosophy, they were arguing using the texts and the terms that Boethius had laid out for them.
So what was his answer to Porphyry's questions? Well, Boethius kind of leaned towards the position we now call realism. He argued that yes, universals like humanity are absolutely real, but they don't exist in some other dimension. Nope, they exist within individual things, and our minds have this amazing power to sort of pull out or abstract this common essence and understand it as a single idea.
And Boethius's answer basically drew the battle lines. By the 11th and 12th centuries, his early thoughts had exploded into an all-out philosophical war, with thinkers splitting into 2 major camps.
At its heart, the conflict is about what's actually real. On one side, you've got the realists. They argued that universals are res, the Latin for things. They're real substances. For a realist, there's a single actual substance called humanity that every single person shares in. And on the other side, you had the nominalists. They said universals are just noumena, or names. For them, the only things that are real are individual, particular things. Humanity isn't a substance, it's just a word, a convenient label we use to group similar individuals together.
The intellectual stage was set, and walking right into the middle of this firestorm was one of the most brilliant, charismatic, and controversial minds of the entire Middle Ages, Peter Abelard.
Abelard was a master logician, and he just dismantled the realist position with this killer argument. He basically said, okay, hold on a second. If this universal thing called animal is a single substance, and it exists completely in a man and completely in a dog at the exact same time, well then that one substance has to be both rational and irrational all at once. That's a flat-out logical contradiction. It's impossible. Checkmate. So Abelard tried to find a clever third way. He said, look, universals aren't real things, but they're not just empty names either. They are meaningful words, sermons, that point to a real, shared condition.
or a status. So the word human doesn't point to a thing called humanity. It points to the status hominis, literally, the state of being a human, a condition that you, me, Socrates, and Plato all share.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, things, names, statuses, I get it, but why did they care so much about this? Well, it turns out this very abstract debate had huge real-world implications for their entire worldview.
I mean, this was never just some nerdy academic exercise. The answer to this question touched on everything, the very foundations of knowledge, how language even works, and, this is the big one, it had massive consequences for theology.
And here's why it got so explosive. For theologians in the Middle Ages, the biggest mystery of their faith was the Holy Trinity. How can God be one single substance, but also exist as three distinct persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit? The philosophical problem of how one universal thing, like humanity, could exist in many different individuals was seen as a perfect rational parallel to this core belief. If you could solve one, maybe, just maybe, you could begin to understand the other.
Now that level of intensity couldn't last forever, but the questions that fueled it, they never really went away. So let's take a look at the legacy of this incredible debate and see how it's still shaping our world. After centuries of all this back and forth, the debate kind of settled into three main philosophical positions that have been echoing through Western thought ever since. You have realism, which says universals are truly real. You have nominalism, which says only individual things are real. And then you have a middle ground, often called conceptualism and tied to Abelard, which says universals are concepts in our minds that actually correspond to real similarities between things in the world.
And this really brings us to the final thought here. The problem of universals never disappeared, it just changed its outfit. When we argue today about whether something like justice or human rights is a timeless truth that we discover, or if it's just a cultural idea that we invented, we are standing on the shoulders of these medieval philosophers. We're asking Porphyry's thousand-year-old question all over again.